She fetched the coffee, quiet and unseen, a patch on her sleeve, a secret between, mocked and dismissed by all who stared, until one pilot noticed and truly cared. Asterisk before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an incredible story like this one. Now, let's jump into the story. The morning air at Hillcrest Air Base had that crisp, clean tang that only early spring could bring. Rows of jets gleamed under the soft glow of the rising sun, and the distant hum of maintenance vehicles created a steady, almost comforting rhythm. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's routines, their roles, their limits. For Lieutenant Sarah Mercer, today began as it always did, quietly, almost invisibly. She tightened her jacket against the chill and adjusted the strap of her utility bag as she made her way through the base's narrow corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the concrete, a solitary sound amid the muted clatter of early morning activity. Today, like most days, she had one simple mission before the day's briefing began: fetch coffee for the pilots. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't particularly rewarding, but it was necessary, and it got her through the scrutiny of the room she'd face shortly. Sarah Mercer was a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence, though no one on the base seemed to notice or, perhaps, care. She was underestimated. Constantly. Her skills and accomplishments often dismissed simply because she didn't fit the image of what a real pilot looked like. Her hair was tied neatly behind her head, her uniform pristine, but the weight of invisible judgment clung to her like a shadow dot as she reached the base cafeteria. A few of the young male officers lingered near the coffee machine. One of them, Lieutenant Grant, smirked at her as she poured the hot brew into a tray. "Careful, Mercer," he said with a mock-serious tone. "Don't spill anything on yourself. Wouldn't want anyone to actually notice you today." Sarah didn't respond. She had learned long ago that arguing with men like Grant only invited more ridicule. Instead, she kept her focus, filling mugs with precision, ignoring the snickers that floated behind her back. But the sting of the words stayed with her. Even after all her years of service, the casual dismissals, the quiet undermining, never fully left. Carrying the tray through the corridors, Sarah thought about the briefing. Ahead, Major Phillips would be there, along with all the other pilots and officers. This was where the hierarchy of the base was cemented, where respect or lack of it was made painfully clear. And she, as always, would be on the outside looking. As she approached the briefing room, the doors opened, spilling the murmur of conversation into the hallway. She paused for a moment, straightening her back. This wasn't just about coffee. It was about asserting her presence, however small it might seem. She stepped inside, her tray balanced carefully in her hands, and immediately felt the familiar wave of scrutiny. "Ah, Mercer," someone drawled. Captain Reynolds, known for his sharp tongue and relentless sarcasm, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Bringing us coffee again? You're really ambitious, aren't you?" Laughter followed from a few nearby officers. Sarah forced a polite smile. "Just helping, sir," she said softly, setting the tray down. "You'd do better focusing on your own work," Reynolds added, his tone dripping with condescension. "Some of us actually fly planes. Some of us make decisions that matter." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Sarah felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a mixture of frustration, anger, and the old, stubborn determination that refused to let these insults define her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of what she was capable, the countless hours of training, the missions completed flawlessly, the sacrifices no one here ever acknowledged. As the pilots began to gather their coffee, Sarah moved quietly to the side, hoping to avoid further commentary. She noticed, almost without realizing it, the patch on her uniform sleeve a simple, unassuming insignia that marked her as part of an elite flight operations unit. It was easy to overlook, especially for someone who didn't pay attention to details. She had earned the right to wear it through years of dedication and skill, though most of her colleagues didn't know what it meant. That's when she saw him, Lieutenant Commander David Harlan. He had just walked in, scanning the room with sharp, professional eyes. He was known across the base for his exacting standards, his keen observation, and most importantly, his respect for skill over rank or appearance. His gaze fell on her as she moved past him with the coffee tray. And then it lingered. Harlan's eyes flicked down to the patch on her sleeve. A subtle raise of his eyebrows, a barely perceptible nod. It was a recognition, but more than that, it was an acknowledgement of her competence, something she hadn't received from anyone in months. For a moment, the laughter, the condescension, the dismissals, all of it faded into the background. Lieutenant Mercer? Harlan's voice was calm, carrying across the room without needing to shout. Would you join me after the briefing? The request was simple, but it carried weight. And in that instant, Sarah felt a surge of quiet vindication. She had been underestimated, mocked, overlooked, but here was someone who saw her for what she truly was. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She nodded, her hand brushing against the tray. Yes, sir, she replied as the room settled for the briefing. Sarah took her place at the edge of the room. The voices, the laughter, the sneers, they no longer had the same power. The patch on her sleeve, small and unassuming, had quietly shifted the balance. And deep down she knew that this was only the beginning. Something bigger, something that would test her courage, her resilience, and her determination was coming. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the insignia in a glint of gold and silver thread. Sarah Mercer, once invisible, was about to step into a spotlight she hadn't asked for, but was more than ready to claim. The briefing room smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and the lingering residue of late-night planning sessions. Sarah Mercer moved to the edge of the room, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, as she positioned herself to avoid unnecessary attention. The pilots, officers, and higher-ups began filtering in, voices low, carrying fragments of chatter about missions, weather reports, and the usual banter that filled Hillcrest Air Base each morning. Major Phillips, a stout man with a square jaw and a commanding presence, tapped his pen against the edge of the conference table, signaling that the meeting was about to begin. Conversations quieted, and all eyes turned to him. Sarah could feel the familiar tension in the room, the unspoken hierarchy that reminded her daily of her position. She had learned to navigate it with grace, though it often felt like walking a tightrope. All right, Major Phillips began, voice booming. Let's get started. Today, we have several updates from the operations team and a few announcements. His gaze swept over the room, landing briefly on Sarah before moving on. Lieutenant Mercer, thank you for the coffee. You may step out while we begin. The word stung, not because of the dismissal itself, but because it underscored the invisible barriers she faced every day. She nodded, careful not to let any emotion show. She could retreat to a corner, or she could stay and assert herself quietly, subtly, but effectively. She chose the latter. Harlan, the pilot who had noticed the patch earlier, met her eyes from across the room. His look was calm, measured, but it carried encouragement. Without a word, he gave a subtle nod, as if silently granting her permission to stay. Sarah's chest lifted slightly. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone recognized her presence, not for convenience or appearances, but for who she truly was. As the briefing continued, Harlan requested the floor to address a new assignment. We've received intelligence of potential issues with the surveillance grid along the northern border, he said. His voice was precise, each word deliberate. We need a small team to investigate and ensure operational security. This is not a routine task, and it will require both skill and discretion. Eyes turned to one another, assessing, calculating. Who would be chosen? Whispers circulated among the pilots. Sarah's stomach tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. The patch on her sleeve, an emblem of her training and experience, suddenly felt like a key to a door she had spent years trying to open. Major Phillips cleared his throat. We need a team leader who can handle high-pressure situations, coordinate multiple units, and make quick decisions. Someone with experience, reliability, and courage. His eyes lingered on Sarah, just a fraction longer than necessary. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Several officers exchanged glances, skeptical of the idea of her leading a team. Sarah took a deep breath. The weight of expectation pressed on her, but she had spent years preparing for moments like this. She raised her hand slightly, careful, not to interrupt, yet assertive enough to be noticed. Sir, I have experience coordinating multi-unit operations. I can take responsibility for the assignment if you deem it appropriate. The room fell silent. A few officers exchanged incredulous looks, muttering under their breath. Her? Are you serious? She's barely been on missions. Major. Phillips regarded her steadily. There was no mockery in his eyes, only consideration. Lieutenant Mercer, he said finally, we don't assign based on assumptions. If you are prepared to lead this team, you'll have the authority and responsibility that comes with it. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady, resonant with the confidence she had cultivated over years of being underestimated. The decision seemed to ripple through the room. Some faces hardened with disbelief, others softened with respect. Harlan's expression remained calm but approving. He knew the value of skill over perception. And at that moment, Sarah felt a quiet vindication and acknowledgement that her work, dedication, and resilience had finally earned a foothold in the eyes of those who had doubted her. After the briefing concluded, Sarah stayed behind to meet Harlan privately. The other officers filed out, still whispering, some with disapproval, some with curiosity. Harlan's gaze was firm but kind as he gestured for her to join him near a small whiteboard in the corner. You've been here long enough to know how things work, Harlan began, voice low but serious. Most people won't give you a fair chance, but the patch on your sleeve tells me something they don't. You have the training, the focus, and the courage to handle what's coming. I want you to lead this team. No exceptions, no shortcuts. Are you ready? Sarah felt the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about leading a mission. It was about proving herself in a world that had spent years doubting her. She nodded. Yes, sir, I'm ready. Over the next few days, Sarah prepared meticulously. She reviewed maps, studied protocols, and coordinated with the few trusted personnel who would join her team. Every detail mattered. She knew that even the smallest mistake could be weaponized by those eager to see her fail. During this preparation, however, the whispers never stopped. Officers mocked her behind closed doors, questioning her capability. A few even tried subtle sabotage, misplacing documents, providing outdated information, or withholding critical updates. But Sarah remained unshaken. Each slight, each insult, only strengthened her resolve. She had learned long ago that anger without purpose was useless, but focused determination could turn injustice into triumph. On the morning of the mission, the team assembled quietly at the northern border station. The tension was palpable. Sarah glanced at her unit, noting the mix of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious respect. She stepped forward, straightening her posture. We're here to ensure the integrity of the northern surveillance grid, she began. Her voice carried authority without arrogance. We'll operate as a team. Follow my lead, trust in your training, and watch each other's backs. We succeed together or we fail together. The words seemed to resonate. For the first time, she felt the full weight of leadership settle on her shoulders, and she welcomed it. This mission was more than operational security. It was a chance to reclaim her narrative, to turn years of underestimation into a visible, undeniable achievement. As they moved out, Sarah felt a sense of calm determination. The wind bit at her cheeks, the terrain was rugged, and the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time, doubt didn't overshadow her focus. The patch on her sleeve caught the morning light, a symbol not just of rank, but of the skill, courage, and resilience that had carried her through every challenge. And deep down, she knew that the moment the mission truly began, everything would change, not just for the officers who doubted her, but for herself. This was the turning point, the first step in a journey toward respect, justice, and vindication. The northern border was nothing like the neat lines of the airbase. Here, the world seemed raw and untamed. Patches of evergreen forest gave way to stretches of jagged rock and scrubland. The wind carried a sharp bite, tugging at the edges of uniforms and making every movement slightly more laborious. For Sarah Mercer, the rugged terrain was both a challenge and a test, a proving ground where skill, focus, and emotional strength mattered more than rank or reputation. Her team assembled near a ridge overlooking the surveillance grid. Lieutenant Daniels, a young officer with more bravado than experience, glanced nervously at the surrounding landscape. "Are we really going to patrol this whole stretch?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Sarah didn't flinch. "Yes, every sector. We'll move systematically. Covering one zone at a time ensures nothing is overlooked. Stick close, communicate clearly, and trust the process." Her voice carried authority without intimidation, calmness without hesitation. Noticed subtle glances among the team, some skeptical, some curious, and a few quietly impressed by the clarity of her instructions. Despite years of being mocked and dismissed, Sarah had learned that leadership wasn't about demanding respect. It was about earning it through competence and consistency. The team set out, moving carefully through uneven terrain. The surveillance grid was partially damaged old equipment, disrupted sensors, and signs of tampering that could have compromised the entire security operation. As Sarah examined each section, she noticed patterns that suggested intentional sabotage, not random decay. Her pulse quickened, not out of fear, but from the weight of responsibility. Every observation, every decision mattered. Hours passed in methodical progress. The team followed Sarah's lead with increasing confidence. Daniels, once skeptical, began to rely on her judgments, asking for guidance instead of second-guessing her. Another officer, Sergeant Hayes, a gruff veteran with decades of field experience, nodded in silent approval at her keen analysis of the compromised equipment. Then, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the uneven ground, an alarm blared from a distant monitoring station. The team froze. Sarah's mind snapped into focus. She gestured for silence, scanning the horizon. "Multiple breaches," she muttered. "Sensors indicate unauthorized movement along the southern perimeter. This isn't a coincidence. Someone wants us distracted." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "What do we do?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "We split. Hayes, you take Sector 3 with Daniels. I'll lead the others along the western ridge to intercept. Maintain radio contact at all times." The plan was risky. Splitting the team in hostile territory could expose vulnerabilities. But Sarah understood something that some of the other officers didn't. Risk assessment was not about avoiding danger entirely, but managing it strategically. She trusted her team and her judgment. As they moved, the wind carried a distant metallic clang, followed by faint voices. Sarah signaled for the team to halt and crouched behind a boulder. Using hand signals, she guided them toward a narrow path that would provide both cover and a vantage point. From her position, she could see a group of intruders attempting to tamper with the communications array. The intruders were armed, but their movements were sloppy amateurs trying to disguise expertise they didn't possess. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She assessed the situation. One shot would disable the machinery. 2 officers could secure the perimeter, and the remaining team members could provide cover. "Daniels, take point on the left flank," she instructed quietly. "Harris, provide cover from the ridge. Move carefully, but decisively. We can't afford hesitation." The team executed her plan with precision. Daniels advanced cautiously, neutralizing a minor threat, while Harris monitored the ridge. Sarah took the lead on the western approach, coordinating movements through subtle gestures and quiet commands. Her calm in the chaos radiated through the team, instilling confidence where fear could have taken hold. Minutes stretched like hours. Each second weighted with the potential for disaster. Then suddenly, one of the intruders spotted movement and fired a shot. It shattered a nearby rock, sending dust and small debris into the air. Sarah reacted instantly, diving for cover, signaling her team to respond. The exchange was brief, tense. No one was injured, but the intruders fled into the forest, leaving behind the sabotaged equipment. Sarah moved quickly to inspect the damage. She noted patterns of interference, scratches, and tampering marks, enough evidence to suggest a coordinated plan. This wasn't random mischief. Someone wanted to compromise the entire operation. As the team regrouped, fatigue and adrenaline mixed into a complex brew. Sweat streaked their faces, muscles ached, but the pride in accomplishment was visible. They had faced danger under Sarah's leadership, and they had survived, intact and efficient. Hayes approached Sarah quietly. "I'll admit, Mercer," he said gruffly, "I didn't think you had the nerve for field command." "I was wrong." Sarah's lips curved into a faint smile. "It's not nerve," she replied calmly. "It's preparation, observation, and trust. You can't lead by ego. You lead by understanding what's at stake." But even as the team celebrated small victories, Sarah's mind raced. She had uncovered clear evidence of sabotage, but the question remained, who was behind it? And more importantly, how deep did the conspiracy go? As night fell, the team set up a temporary perimeter. Sarah checked communications, ensured the equipment was stabilized, and reviewed the day's observations. Alone for a moment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from being underestimated, mocked, and overlooked, to leading a high-stakes operation that tested her intellect, courage, and emotional resilience. She touched the patch. On her sleeve, the emblem that had caught Harlan's attention weeks ago. It was more than a symbol of rank. It was a marker of identity, sacrifice, and proof that skill could overcome prejudice. The night was quiet, but Sarah knew that danger was far from over. Someone had tried to sabotage the surveillance grid once, and they would likely try again. The mission wasn't just about securing equipment anymore. It was about uncovering a deeper truth, a betrayal hidden within the very walls of Hillcrest Air Base. And Sarah Mercer, underestimated for too long, was ready to confront it head-on. The first light of dawn painted the northern ridge in soft shades of pink and gold, but Sarah Mercer felt no warmth from the sun. She was exhausted, her body tense from hours of vigilance, yet her mind remained sharp, scanning every detail of the temporary perimeter for overlooked threats. The sabotage at the surveillance grid had been minor, but the implications were anything but. Someone on the base, or at least with knowledge of its inner workings, had tried to undermine the mission. Her team moved with quiet efficiency, performing system checks, monitoring communications, and securing the equipment that had been compromised the day before. Lieutenant Daniels, though still visibly uneasy, followed her lead with increasing confidence. Sergeant Hayes worked silently. Alongside her, no longer the skeptical, gruff veteran, but an ally who trusted her judgment implicitly. The morning passed without incident, but tension lingered. Sarah knew that whoever had tampered with the grid was calculating, methodical, and likely still watching. It wasn't just a physical threat, it was psychological, designed to erode confidence and sow doubt. She had faced condescension and mockery her entire career, but this was different. This was calculated sabotage, aimed at undermining her authority and the integrity of the base itself. Back at Hillcrest, the base was beginning to stir with routine activity. Reports from the field had filtered in, and whispers circulated among the officers. A few pilots openly questioned Sarah's leadership, still clinging to old prejudices. "I don't see why Mercer was put in charge," muttered Lieutenant Grant to a colleague. "She's barely flown a mission outside training. What if she fails?" Unbeknownst to them, Harlan had already reviewed Sarah's reports and observations. He recognized the accuracy and thoroughness of her work, and he had personally recommended that she be trusted to continue leading the investigation. But such endorsements, while powerful, could only go so far in silencing whispers and covert opposition within the ranks. Late in the morning, Sarah received a coded message on her secure channel. It was brief, concise, and urgent. "Meet in the East Communications Bay. Discretion required. Possible insider threat." She felt a shiver of unease. An insider threat was one thing, open sabotage was another. Either way, it confirmed her suspicions that the sabotage was not random. It was orchestrated. She signaled to Hayes to stay with the team and move quietly toward the East Communications Bay. The corridor was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly. As she approached the bay, she noticed a shadow move near one of the maintenance doors. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was trained for high-pressure situations, and this was no different from a mission scenario only. The stakes were different. "Sarah Mercer," came a voice from the shadows. It was quiet but deliberate. "We need to talk." She stepped closer cautiously, recognizing the silhouette of Captain Reynolds. His usual smirk was absent. Instead, his face was tight, controlled, calculating. "What's this about?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. Reynolds folded his arms, taking a step into the light. "You've stirred up a lot of attention," he said coldly. "People don't like being undermined by someone they think is beneath them." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had faced condescension before, but this was different. Reynolds was a man of influence on the base, and his words carried weight with those eager to maintain the status quo. "Beneath me? Or beneath your expectations?" she asked evenly. "I didn't come here to please anyone. I came to do my job, and I did it." Reynolds's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand how things work here. Leadership isn't just about competence. It's about knowing your place. You're stepping on toes that should remain untouched." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. For years, she had endured this kind of patronizing behavior, yet she refused to back down now. "My place," she said firmly, "is where I earn it. And I've earned it through skill, diligence, and results. If anyone has a problem with that, it's not my fault they're threatened by it." Reynolds's expression darkened. "You think you're untouchable because a pilot noticed a patch on your sleeve? That insignia doesn't make you invincible. There are rules here, rules that keep the base running smoothly. Cross those rules, and there are consequences." Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm not crossing rules. I'm enforcing them. And I won't let fear, prejudice, or ambition compromise this mission or this base." For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension in the bay was thick, almost palpable. Then Reynolds straightened, giving a faint, controlled nod. "We'll see how long that lasts," he said, retreating into the shadows with a final glance. Sarah's heart pounded, but her resolve hardened. She knew that this confrontation was only the beginning. Reynolds represented a larger problem, a culture of doubt, sabotage, and suppression that had allowed capable individuals like her to be ignored for far too long. Returning to her team, Sarah shared only what was necessary: the presence of internal resistance and the possibility of an insider threat. She didn't mention Reynolds by name. There was no need to escalate yet. Instead, she focused on strategy, reinforcing procedures, and keeping her team vigilant. The day wore on, and Sarah's mind remained alert, scanning for anomalies. By evening, they received reports of another tampering incident, this time at the southern surveillance array. The signs mirrored the previous sabotage, but there were subtle differences, suggesting a higher level of sophistication. Someone was adapting, learning, and staying one step ahead. Gathering her team, Sarah addressed the growing tension. "We've seen attempts to disrupt our operations, and it's clear we're dealing with someone who understands the base," she said. "That doesn't make them smarter than us. It makes us more careful, more observant. Stick to protocol, watch each other's backs, and report everything. We're stronger together." Her words carried authority, reassurance, and inspiration. The team responded with nods and quiet determination. Even those who had doubted her now recognized her clarity and courage under pressure. Alone later that night, Sarah reflected on the confrontation with Reynolds and the sabotage incidents. Her mind traced patterns, considering motives, opportunities, and connections. She realized that winning this fight wouldn't just require skill in the field. It would require intelligence, patience, and emotional resilience. She had survived ridicule, mockery, and underestimation before, but this was the first time she faced a direct, strategic opposition from within her own ranks. Her thoughts returned to the patch on her sleeve, the emblem that had first caught Harlan's attention. It wasn't just a symbol of achievement. It was a promise she made to herself. She would uncover the truth, protect her team, and reclaim respect, not through intimidation or confrontation alone, but through unwavering competence and integrity. As she looked out over the northern border from the ridge, shadows stretching long across the terrain, Sarah Mercer understood that the greatest battles were not always against visible enemies. Sometimes they were against prejudice, secrecy, and betrayal forces that could erode trust, morale, and mission success, and she was ready to fight them all. The following morning dawned gray and heavy over Hillcrest Air Base. A fine mist hung over the northern perimeter, clinging to the trees and rocks like a veil. Sarah Mercer stood at the edge of the ridge, surveying the terrain with a keen eye. Her team moved with disciplined precision, their trust in her guidance evident in the quiet confidence of their movements. But beneath that calm surface, the weight of the previous day's revelations pressed on her, especially the realization that the threat wasn't just outside the base, but within it. Reports had come in overnight of another attempted sabotage, this time in the maintenance hangar. Communications were delayed, minor alarms had been triggered, and someone had tried to tamper with flight logs. Each incident pointed to a single, coordinated source, an insider who knew the base's routines, its personnel, and its weaknesses. Sarah gathered her team quietly, outlining the plan. "We'll split into two groups," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Daniels and Hayes will secure the southern perimeter and inspect the hangars. The rest of us will sweep the northern sectors and monitor communications. Check every device, every cable, every record. Nothing is too small to investigate." Her team nodded, moving with the precision she had instilled over the past days. Even Daniels, who had started the mission full of doubt, now followed her lead without hesitation. Sarah felt a quiet pride at how far they had come together, but she knew that the most difficult part was yet to come. As they moved through the northern sectors, Sarah noticed subtle discrepancies in the sensor readings, tiny anomalies that indicated tampering. She crouched beside a control panel, her fingers tracing the wiring with meticulous care. Each adjustment she made, each observation she recorded, brought her closer to the truth. Then she noticed something that made her pause. A set of footprints leading away from the equipment, partially obscured by mud, but still distinct. They weren't random. They suggested someone had moved quickly, carefully, and with purpose. She signaled the team to follow, moving silently through the mist. The trail led them to an abandoned storage shed near the edge of the perimeter. Sarah motioned for silence and gestured for the team to spread out. She approached the door cautiously, pressing her ear to the wood. Inside, she could hear low voices, the faint clatter of tools, and the unmistakable sound of someone rifling. Through files, she gave a subtle nod, and the team moved into position. Sarah counted silently, 5 of them strategically placed, ready to confront the intruder. With a quick signal, she pushed the door open, stepping into the dim light of the shed. Inside, she found Captain Reynolds kneeling beside a set of flight logs, attempting to remove incriminating evidence. His eyes widened in surprise as he looked up, but his expression quickly shifted to defiance. "Mercer," he said, standing slowly, "you really think you can stop this?" Sarah's gaze was unwavering. "It ends today," she said firmly. "I've seen the sabotage, traced the evidence, and I know it's you. Step aside, or I will secure you myself." Reynolds sneered. "You? A lieutenant? You've been lucky. Nothing more. Do you really think anyone will back you up against me?" At that moment, Harlan and the rest of Sarah's team entered the shed, surrounding Reynolds. His confidence faltered as he realized he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outsmarted. The smirk faded from his face, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. Sarah stepped closer, her presence commanding. "This isn't about luck. It's about preparation, observation, and courage. You underestimated me, and you underestimated everyone. Else you thought you could manipulate. That stops now." Reynolds' shoulders slumped as he recognized that his position of power had crumbled. The evidence of his sabotage was undeniable: tampered equipment, altered flight logs, and traces of interference, all pointed directly to him. The betrayal, once hidden behind a veneer of authority, was exposed. The following hours were a blur of reporting, securing evidence, and ensuring the base's systems were fully operational. Sarah oversaw every step, her meticulous attention to detail, ensuring that nothing was missed. By the time the dust settled, Reynolds had been removed from his post, facing disciplinary action and formal charges for sabotage and misconduct. For Sarah, the victory was more than professional. It was personal. She had endured years of underestimation, ridicule, and subtle sabotage, yet she had remained steadfast, proving that skill, intelligence, and integrity could overcome prejudice and deceit. The base began to shift in response. Officers who had once mocked her now approached with cautious respect. Even Daniels and Hayes, who had initially doubted her, spoke openly of their admiration for her leadership and judgment. Sarah knew that respect earned in the field, through competence and courage, was far more lasting than the hollow deference demanded by rank or reputation. That evening, as the sun set over the ridge, Sarah stood alone for a moment, looking out over the northern perimeter. The equipment was secure, the team rested, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. There were always challenges, always obstacles, but she had proven to herself and others that she could face them head-on. Harlan approached quietly, his presence reassuring. "You handled that well," he said simply, "better than anyone expected." Sarah glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't do it for expectations," she replied. "I did it because it needed to be done, and because it was the right thing to do." He nodded, respect evident in his gaze. "Then consider your mission accomplished, not just operationally, but in every way that matters." For the first time in years, Sarah felt fully seen, fully recognized, not for appearances, not for rank, but for the combination of courage, intelligence, and integrity that had always defined her. The northern border lay quiet under the fading light, but for Sarah Mercer, the quiet was not emptiness. It was victory, hard-earned and undeniable. The battle had been won, the truth revealed, and the respect she had long been denied had finally been earned. The aftermath of Reynolds' exposure rippled through Hillcrest Air Base like a quiet storm. By morning, the news of the sabotage and the lieutenant who had uncovered it had spread. The whispers that had once diminished Sarah Mercer's presence were replaced by murmurs of respect, admiration, and in some quarters, reluctant acknowledgement. But Sarah didn't seek recognition. She never had. What mattered was the mission, the team, and the truth. She walked through the base early that morning, the crisp air brushing against her face. Every officer she passed gave a nod or a brief acknowledgement, a stark contrast to the mocking looks and dismissive tones that had defined her daily life for years. Even Lieutenant Grant, who had once openly doubted her, offered a curt, almost awkward salute. Sarah returned it with a quiet nod, her posture steady, her mind already focused on the future. Harlan approached, holding a folder of debrief notes. "And reports. You've set a new standard here," he said. "Not just for operational skill, but for integrity and leadership. People will remember this." Sarah shook her head gently. "I just did what needed to be done. Leadership isn't about recognition. It's about responsibility. If you do it right, the rest follows naturally." The morning briefing convened with a different energy than before. Officers and pilots entered with attentive expressions, no longer dismissive. Major Phillips addressed the room, his usual stern demeanor softened by gravity. "Lieutenant Mercer has demonstrated extraordinary competence and courage under pressure," he announced. "Her leadership during the recent incidents has secured the base's operations and exposed an internal threat that could have compromised everything. Let this be a reminder that integrity, skill, and determination are what truly define leadership." A quiet hum of approval filled the room. Sarah remained at the edge, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, but the weight of validation settled. In a way it never had before. The patch on her sleeve, the same emblem that had first drawn Harlan's attention, gleamed subtly in the sunlight streaming through the windows. It was no longer just a symbol of her rank. It was a mark of perseverance, courage, and the silent battles she had fought every day. After the briefing, Sarah's team gathered quietly around her. Daniels, now more confident and composed, offered a small, genuine smile. You really earned our respect, Lieutenant," he admitted. Hayes nodded in agreement, his gruff demeanor softened by sincerity. "You've got what it takes, Mercer. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah felt a rare, quiet warmth. The journey had been long, fraught with ridicule, subtle sabotage, and underestimation, but her team now understood her not as a subordinate, not as someone to be dismissed, but as a leader who had faced danger, adversity, and betrayal with unwavering courage. Harlan approached last, his expression thoughtful. "There's more work ahead," he said, "but with your skills, judgment, and integrity, I have no doubt you'll succeed. And for what it's worth, you've earned something far more valuable than a title: respect from the people who truly matter." Sarah allowed herself a small, confident smile. For years she had been invisible, underestimated, and dismissed, but the tide had turned. She had faced the very forces that sought to undermine her: prejudice, sabotage, and internal betrayal, and emerged not just victorious, but stronger, wiser, and respected. Later that afternoon, she walked alone to the northern perimeter, the ridge bathed in golden sunlight. The wind tugged at her uniform, carrying the scent of pine and earth. She paused, touching the patch on her sleeve. It had been more than just a symbol. It had been a promise to herself that she would never let doubt, mockery, or injustice define her. From that vantage point, Sarah looked out at the vast, rugged landscape she had navigated and protected. It was a reminder that challenges would always exist, that enemies both external and within would never disappear completely. But she had learned something vital. Courage, skill, integrity, and emotional strength could not be undermined by prejudice or sabotage. A faint smile touched her lips. The path forward was clear. She would continue to serve, lead, and protect undaunted, unshakable, and respected. The base had learned an invaluable lesson. True leadership is earned, not assumed. As she turned to return to the base, Harlan's voice carried behind her. "Ready for the next mission, Lieutenant?" She paused, looking back at the ridge, her eyes steady and resolute. "Always," she replied, her voice calm, confident, and unwavering. For the first time, Sarah Mercer felt fully seen, not just as a lieutenant, not just as someone carrying a patch on her sleeve, but as a brave, capable, and unshakable leader. And in that recognition, she found not just victory, but the quiet, enduring satisfaction of justice finally realized. The wind swept across the ridge, carrying the promise of new challenges and new opportunities. And Sarah Mercer, once underestimated, was ready to meet them all.